Meeting of 11th meeting, public meeting of Commission of Fathermen and Boys is now in session. My name is George Garrow. I'm Commission Chair. I apologize for being late. Got caught in traffic. Asked for the commissioners to identify themselves from my right to the left.
Okay. Hi, I'm Elsie Scott.
I'm Jelani Moraine.
And I'm Judge Arthur Burnett, Secretary of the Commission.
Yes, thank you. I know we have a few other commissioners on their way, unfortunately. I think everybody might have had the same problem with respect to traffic. I want to recognize our chair, Tony Duggar, who's going to give us approval of minutes.
Yeah, Executive Director. Yeah. You're the chair.
No, you're right. You're right. I agree.
Thank you, Dr. Ebo.
I agree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Commission on Fathermen and Boys was established by the DC City Council in 2013 for the purpose of addressing disparities in education, economic opportunity, fatherlessness, health and well-being, issues of public safety, and rehabilitation and reintegration of returning citizens. And though there have been considerable improvements in the District of Columbia, males of color continue to improve at a much slower rate than their peers, educationally, economically, and as it relates to father involvement in the lives of their children. The Commission, as it moves forward, will continue to address health and well-being, issues of public safety, and the successful reintegration of returning citizens.
Thank you. Actually, Mr. Duggar read pretty much our mission statement. Now we will have approval of the minutes of the last meeting. The last meeting was held September 29th, 2017 here, and those minutes are in your folders, Chair. Commissioners, you've had an opportunity to review them briefly. Can I have a motion on the floor to approve these minutes as
So moved by the Secretary.
all in favor?
Did you get a second?
A second? Why don't you second? Thank you. I appreciate it. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The ayes have it. Minutes are approved. Previous minutes are approved. Actually, this meeting, we have one topic and one presenter. The esteemed Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, CNO and President of NPCL. I'm going to have Mr. Duggar introduce him, and then without further ado, we'll have Mr. Johnson, Dr. Johnson, to come up and speak to us.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Dr. Johnson comes to us as the President and CEO of the National Partnership for Community Leadership, and as a national nonprofit intermediary organization. The mission of NPCL is to strengthen the service capacity of nonprofits and community-based agencies to empower men, youth, and families. As president of NPCL, Dr. Johnson has overseen the planning and implementation of two of the nation's largest social welfare research projects involving low-income men. These projects were Partners for Fragile Families site demonstration and the Fathers at Work demonstration. Since 1997, Dr. Johnson and NPCL have convened an annual international fatherhood conference that attracts community-based and family practitioners from around the world. And Dr. Johnson is a nationally recognized authority in the areas of leadership, employment and training, urban poverty, and youth employment. A particular focus of Dr. Johnson's work has been on the plight of African-American men and families. He is regularly invited to testify before the United States Congress on matters pertaining to fathers and strengthening families. He played a principal role in the passage of the first national fatherhood legislation in Congress, the Fathers Count Bill. And Dr. Johnson is also author of several publications, including Father Development, a curriculum for young fathers. Dr. Johnson also has been quoted in many of the country's leading newspapers, including the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, Washington Post, Washington Times, and the Afro-American newspapers. Dr. Johnson has also appeared on the Tavis Smiley Show, the Michael Basin Show, the Steve Harvey Show, CNN, C-SPAN, and Fox Morning News. He has extensive civic involvement and serves on many community boards where he has received numerous service awards. He currently serves as a member of the Board of Advisors for the Morehouse College Research Institute, the District of Columbia's Commission on African American Men and Boys, and the District of Columbia's Neighborhood College, wherein he serves as board chair. And so Dr. Johnson is also a member of the People's Community Baptist Church of Silver Spring, where he serves as president of the Men's Fellowship Ministry. He is also a 2009 Peace Ambassador and has received that award and became a recipient for his national and international work with men and families. I give you Dr. Jeffrey Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, Tony, for that introduction. I don't know what to say other than the fact that I've worked hard and continue to work hard. Chairman Garrow, it's a pleasure to see you.
Same here.
Judge Burnett, longtime colleague, good to see you as well. And good to see the other commissioners here as well as members of the audience. When Tony informed me about this opportunity, he said that kind of just share what I thought would be important. I think that there were some particular areas that he wanted me to talk about, including funding for fatherhood projects and sustainability. So I will focus in on those things as well. Let me just say from the beginning that I've been involved in fatherhood work in the District of Columbia for a very long time, even with the first commission that was not necessarily focused on fatherhood, but was focused on black men, that was chaired by Councilmember Frank Smith. And so if some of you remember Frank Smith, that goes back to 1989. And then when Delegate Norton set up her version of it, I also served on that commission as well, and had participation in that. I also, with Mr. Duggar, when there was the first citywide fatherhood conference that he was planning, I participated in that. And it was interesting because the keynote speaker back then was an up-and-coming Vincent Gray. And so I say all those things to say that I do have an understanding of how fatherhood has evolved in the district, and when it comes time for the question and answer period, I will be happy to address some of those things. As was articulated in you all's mission statement, I'm not saying anything new to you when I say that the crisis of fatherhood and the crisis of particularly low-income families is well known. And the reason why I think that's an important place to start, because one might ask, why are we doing this? And I would just say there is a cause, and the cause is a lot of things. It's interesting when I think about this very issue. It takes me back to this report that came out in, I think, 1965 that was written by Patrick Moynihan, and it was called the Negro Family, the State of the Negro Family. And it was interesting back then, from a contextual standpoint, when this white guy came out and took leadership over an issue that had direct implications for the black community. Given our attitude at the time, it was not well received. As a matter of fact, many of us said, what's this white guy doing telling us about our set of issues? But a careful reading of that is the fact that somebody had to report it out. And I think that one of the challenges that this commission and others have, just like he had, is to report out, accurate data and information on what's going on. What gets a lot of attention from that initial report was the increase in the number of single-parent households of women. And back during that time, when we talk about 1965, it was 25%. We look some almost 60 years later, not only is that still an issue, 25% was high then, but now 75% of all African American children are born out of wedlock, which is almost a euphemism for saying father absence, particularly when you talk about poor families. Because, and the reason why we can state it that way is because of the long-standing man in the house rule. If the child gets welfare and the mother is the parent of resident, then the eligibility rules preclude the father from being there for a whole host of reasons. And it's long-standing, and it goes back to the history of how our 80th AFDC program was set up in the first place. And it was initially written in the 1930s for widows with children, so that children would have to become wards of the state. And so from the very beginning of our family policy in this country, initially fathers were dead, and then when we found out that many fathers that were there, they were poor. And let me just harken back to the Moynihan report, because what people tend to focus in on is what he said about the emerging black female head of household issue. But if you look at the preceding chapters leading up to that, he also talked about the declines in blue collar employment, in industrial jobs. I grew up in Detroit, and so that was how my father and his father and my uncles, that was the reason they migrated from Alabama to get those jobs. And those jobs began to decline after World War II, and they've been declining ever since that time. And the reason why that becomes a particularly important issue for our discussion, because I do think that even in addressing the fatherhood issues today, employment is still a factor. And I don't believe, and you can't prove it to me scientifically, that coal is coming back either. No pun intended with that. But I would say that that's an important thing, because one of the things that influenced decisions of family formation up to and including marriage was whether or not men had jobs. And they had jobs that paid a family sustaining wage. Those jobs still are very difficult to find amongst a segment of the population who did not finish high school, who had some contact with the criminal justice system. It's interesting, during the boom years of the Clinton economy, one of the things that was that we discovered was that all boats actually rose for a lot of those in the employment market, with the exception of black men who didn't have high school diplomas and who had some contact with the criminal justice system. And those are the very families, as I look at what y'all are trying to do, at least my sense of one of the purposes of this commission is to really, understand who that population group is, because it is fathers, but it's a particular set of fathers who, if I was to use a hospital analogy, would probably be in the emergency ward. And that either we do something with them and try to make them decent, or they get gobbled up by the streets, and then they end up in Judge Burnett's court or somebody else's court, to adjudicate their situation. And so, just wanted to talk about that a bit, just to say that these are long-standing, structural sets of issues. Some time ago, here in the district, when I began working on black male concerns, people used to ask me often, what do our men need to get out of this funk? I said, what we need is a good job and a pat on the back. We're fine. But those things pack a punch. And those are the very things that don't happen evenly across the board and haven't been for some years, and it's having devastating consequences on our children. When fathers are not involved, when fathers are not engaged, which is to me a much stronger point to make about what we want from fathers, all hell breaks loose for the kids. They don't do well when they start school. If they don't work with mom during the pregnancy period, the chances are the child will grow up, will be born at a low birth weight. It's interesting in those progressive initiatives I see right now that there are health departments who are getting involved in this, calling the crisis of father absence in black families, and I might add, formal and documented father involvement, because there's a CDC study that came out about 2 years ago that did a study, and it was anecdotal information. It was not the hard science that we look for, but what they found was that of those fathers that they interviewed across the board, that they found that black fathers were more involved in their kids' lives than any other fathers in the United States of all racial and ethnic groups. And I think it's a misnomer to think that the fathers are not there, but they're not there formally. They're not there, and when they start out without some intervention to help them overcome whatever barriers that might get in the way of them being the best dad they can, pretty soon they leave the picture. And then, our children, the circumstances of our children turn out to be what they are.
That was a fairly recent study.
Yeah, well, about 2 years ago by CDC. And so when father's not there, children run away more. They get involved in gangs more. The daughters get pregnant earlier. The children are more susceptible to getting involved in things that lead to going to jail or some state or federal run institution. And so there are tremendous burdens and consequences that happen to children when fathers aren't there. The reverse of that is that when fathers are there, children do better in school. They are prepared to go to school, and they know how to respond to authority. They know how to stand in line in order. They have a more fluent vocabulary. And when I say that, people often think that, well, you say, well, dad's doing all these things, what does mom do? Well, the magic of it is when mom and dad are doing it together. You know what I mean? So the research says, and there are over 100 studies that say that having a loving and nurturing father is as important to a child's development as having a loving and nurturing mother. Not more than, but just as important. And so in what we're faced with today, whether or not that mother and father are in a marriage or not, because there was some work done on the marriage program. As a matter of fact, the Bush administration put about $50 million into studying marriage projects. And what the research said was, what many of us suspected all along, was that the government cannot increase marriage rates. It's a private decision. And the programs that they looked at, up to including one in Baltimore, that they couldn't get participants there on a regular basis.
Joe's program?
I'm talking across the board. I'm not
Okay.
singling Joe out, but he was one of the sites.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But they couldn't get the participants in there on a regular basis. And when they did come, it was primarily mom and not dad. And then if you use getting married as a metric, it's something you just can't do it, because it's such a private decision that to set up a program to say that couples are going to get married, even though the couples may, the reason why it doesn't work is because the couples, may not even be in love with each other. They just may have had a sexual relationship. My friend Ron Mincy says that there are a lot of oops babies out here. Oops. Which gets in the way of the commitment of hanging in there over the long haul. But I say that to say and even a lot of our marriage scholars right now, including folks like Elizabeth Sawhill from Brookings Institution and others, they're writing extensively now, not on marriage but on parenting. on parenting, the importance of parenting. You know, how a
And
child.
some of them were writing about marriage.
That's right, but
which encouraged Bush administration
to do it in the first
provide
place.
the money in the first place.
In the first place. But
Elizabeth
after,
Sawhill, I believe,
that's right.
was one of them.
That's right. And after $50 million evaluation, you know, they couldn't help but say, maybe we're focusing on the wrong thing, because what we do know for certain is that they're parents. What we don't know for sure is whether or not if we fund a marriage program, it's going to make couples marry. But let me just talk about a couple other things. Let me start off on the funding side of things. And I'd like the commissioners to have this document. And I'm just focused on, and I do have some extra copies for some members of the audience if they want to. And so when you think about funding, and again, I think that these are funding projects, funding opportunities for low income, most in need populations. But what this illustrates is where the money is that relates to what this commission is doing. And as you can see, there's TANF resources, TANF programs locally, TANF programs federally. In terms of the federal fatherhood initiatives, the New Pathways Project, which is $75 million worth of projects focused on responsible fatherhood, $75 million focused on marriage, and now they're saying relationship education. That's under our TANF program, and it's up for renewal in 2020. And I saw a couple days ago where President Trump said that they're going to be looking at the welfare reform very closely, and he kind of stated an old Ronald Reagan view that there's too many people on welfare taking advantage of it, kind of conjuring up these images of folks who don't need it getting this welfare.
The welfare queen.
Yeah, so you got that. So be mindful of that. But right now, for the sake of the federal funding for fatherhood, that money is safe. And the reason why I think it's safe, based on conversations I've had with even staff members on the Hill, is that it's too small. It's so small, and the bang for your buck is there, at least for publicity more than anything else. But if it had a bigger budget, maybe they would target it. And we just don't know what Mr. Trump is going to do. If somebody does, please tell me. And as you all know, that the fatherhood programs and the marriage programs are under the Office of Family Assistance. They're the ones who have administrative responsibility for the grants, and they're under the Administration for Children and Families. You also have under that mentoring children of prisoners. I might add here, when you look at these funds, and I think that these are funds that the commission can encourage others who are doing fatherhood work, mentoring work, to apply for. At some point, but these are 5-year grants. They're 5-year, they're competitive grants, and the way it's been going is that once they make the awards, and I think they're 2 years old right now, you can't apply for these funds again until 5 years are up. And out of the $150 million total that goes to those programs, there are about 80 projects around the country, and these were competitively bidded on projects. But the way I look at this, and I understand, I'm not a politician, but I understand politics, and that is that when you think about it, $150 million, right, each year over 5 years, but $150 million to be competed for by 50 states and the territories, right? Don't sound like a lot of money to me, but I would say this, particularly on the TANF side, that everything that the federal government is doing, it can be done in the district, because states do have flexibility in terms of how they do their TANF programs. And so the same things that happen at the federal level, states and jurisdictions like the district can do the same. With their existing resources. And in those places where these things are working without federal funds, it's through state TANF funds, and state child support funds, because child support has the money. Because child support, the reason why they have the money, because they collect the most money. Child support is set up as a federal collection agency. And so for every $1 that a state, for every $1 they collect at the state, the Fed matches it by $2. That's a lot of money. And that's why child support programs are so popular in states across the country, because it's a moneymaker, for states. I like more rules, because when you don't have the rules, then states can say that they're doing any number of things to reduce poverty. And that's where we get lost in the sauce, if you will, because unless you got a strong advocate community, and unless you know what the TANF program is, I'd be interested. I'm just going to ask you generally. I'm not a politician, but I understand politics. How many of y'all have seen the District of Columbia's TANF program? A document. It's a document. You have to have one in order to be participating in the program. And I would submit that if y'all have not seen it, it'd be an interesting reading. Because the reason why I say that is because...
Is there a sign-off on it?
What do you mean by sign-off?
So if you're a person who's receiving TANF, do you have to sign off on that document, or is it something they give you?
No, it's a state document.
No, he's talking about the state document.
I'm talking about the state document. The state document
that defines the program.
That defines the program. And the reason why I know, one, I just know it exists. I've been around this a long time. I used to serve on the Fatherhood Commission in the state of Maryland. One of the things that the Fatherhood Commission did, we requested, a look at it, and actually, as part of our reconnaissance, actually went around and interviewed all of the committee members who were responsible for overseeing it, just to give us their understanding of it, and so it's something interesting to think about and do.
Now here in the district, that is run by income maintenance, right?
It'd be income maintenance.
DHS.
And who would that be, Dr. Tunde? Who would that be?
That's Laura Zollinger.
Laura?
Laura, the Department of Human Services.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
That's the director.
Okay. So it'd be interesting because, again, it's interesting when the welfare bill, when welfare changed as we knew it, what kind of led to the Father's Count bill in the first place was because when we were changing welfare as we knew it, one of the things, Jason DeParle, who was a writer for the New York Times, was following this, and he even wrote a book about it, some of this. And so, and all of us, were just, for fatherhood, we were excited for this reason, because what we thought is that once the welfare cases that became time limited, were dealt with, then there would be surplus money available for the fatherhood program. And had that happened, there never would have been a Father's Counts bill. But the reason why the Father's Counts bill was initiated in the first place is because those surpluses that we were looking for never occurred. And the reason why they never occurred is because even though the mothers were getting off the welfare rolls, they weren't making enough money to not need additional public assistance for the child. And so what we thought would be a surplus turned out to be resources for work supports, for child care, for
working mother.
for working mothers. And so the spigot never turned to fathers until the 2004 deficit reduction bill, when Mr. Bush made that happen.
But Dr. Johnson, are you suggesting that the district, with some of those TANF dollars, could have a parallel granting program.
Oh, absolutely.
Consistent with the federal government granting,
absolutely.
fatherhood granting program.
Right. Not only on TANF, but also on Head Start. You know, Head Start is required for the first time to have fatherhood programs. Historically, it was encouraged, but it was not required. But Head Start programs have always had in their budget line item parenting dollars. And some of them use that to work out, to reach out to fathers. But reaching out to fathers and working with fathers in a kind of a more of a full service way, we talk about these low income, undereducated, low income, no income men, whose children do qualify for Head Start. When the fathers come around, you got to get them involved in more than just the policy council and fixing up picnic tables, during picnics, or involving fathers on pizza night. And that's what Head Start has been doing. And so it'd be interesting to see even the Head Start application, what Head Start is doing, because Head Start is now required to work with fathers. So what does that mean? What I think it means, if my experience around the country is any indication, is inviting fathers out for pizza night. And I'm not downplaying that, because at least they're coming, all right? And they're not as hidden.
You make a good point.
That's right.
Because, Joe Jones in Baltimore, that's
Yeah.
essentially how he got his start in fatherhood work. He was working for the Baltimore Department of Health.
Right.
And he sees the opportunity. Working for the Baltimore Department of Health, you've got mothers coming with their children.
That's right.
And he's saying, well, where are the fathers?
Right.
They, maybe some of the fathers brought their children in.
That's right.
Well, let's work with the fathers. So he just began having a support group for the fathers.
Right.
Having them talk about their issues and what have you. What you're suggesting is that with some foresight and planning, much more could be done with those fathers and that family unit.
That's right. And what I'm talking about also, you're exactly right, that George started out of the men's health program at the health department, is that an expanded use of available dollars, as opposed to waiting on the feds. Because if you're waiting on the feds, the federal money. Well, let me finish here, okay?
Okay.
When I look across this myriad of agencies, child support now through the waiver process is funding a lot of fatherhood projects around the country. Matter of fact, I'm working with several, and that's how I'm getting paid. It's through child support dollars. I'm actually talking to child support directors.
So the dollars that the fathers are paying back,
Yes.
paying back
Yes.
to, for example, in this community,
Right.
that's handled by the Office of the Attorney General.
Right.
And they have come to speak to us,
Right.
about that. So the dollars that fathers are paying back could be used creatively
For employment.
for employment.
For employment, because there is the 1115 waiver. And the 1115 waiver allows child support to use their dollars in ways other than for collections. And you have to apply for it, but most child support agencies who apply for federal waivers, they get them because it used to be, when I started in this work some years ago, the majority of cases in child support were cases where I won't say that the fathers had the money, but
They were chasing the father
who likely had the
demonstrated-
money.
who
all right?
demonstrated, yeah.
They were non-TANF fathers.
Yeah.
The majority of cases in child support now are TANF fathers.
TANF fathers, right.
All right, and so which brings up another area that I want to touch on briefly, and that is the importance of partnerships with the community-based organizations and the faith community or whatever. And the reason why it's important for these initiatives to have those connections, because a lot of those dads, they will not go into a government agency, at least not initially, but they're likely to go to a community-based organization who appeals to them on the basis that I'm meeting you where you are, I'm not going to turn you into child support and all these other things, and they're in the community, they're indigenous, these are grassroots groups or whatever, and I know, and I've worked on fatherhood projects in District of Columbia for many years. That's not an easy thing to do, because there's a lot of approvals that have to take place in order to get that money to those organizations. And some of those organizations don't have the dossier, that would suggest, that
They could make use of the money.
that right. But
Good use. Now, but let me ask you something.
yes.
Do you know if here in the district, the dollars that are collected are those by Office of Attorney General's Office of Child Support and Enforcement? Are they used to fund that office?
They do have.
To underwrite the funding of the office itself? I don't recall when it came to
I'm
speaking.
not sure. I'm not sure, but let me just say this. So again, child support has some flexibility. I want to leave that point. 1115 waiver, that's the key. Also, Supreme Court made a decision about 5 years ago, Turner versus Rogers, where they stated that if a father can demonstrate financially he can't pay his child support, and Judge Bennett, you would understand this better than most of us, he cannot be held in contempt, which was the basis on which he goes to jail for the debt. For the debt he owes.
He can't go to debtor's prison.
That's right.
That's
Exactly.
pretty much what
Exactly.
you're saying. Yeah.
Right.
Well, that was, of course, the underpinning of the creation of the fathering court.
Yes.
In Superior Court for fathers to even voluntarily come in and have the child support obligation, and also tie it in with an employment program where we have a group of employers who say if they successfully complete that program, they will put them in the pipeline where they can gradually increase the support payment, but have enough to live on as well.
Exactly.
And
which was his gripe.
Matter of fact, in January 2018, I'm addressing a group of about 85 potential employers connected with Merrill Lynch operation, connected with that type of procedure for Blessed Sacrament Catholic Church. And they have men living in the marketplace, and they want to line up about 75 or more people working with the court system and with me with reference to referrals. And both as to employment and child support, but a graduated rate.
Right. And so, thank you for that, Judge Bennett. A couple more things I want to say. So for child support locally, again, most child support programs around the country, they participate in the federal program. And that's where the dollars come in, because they get the dollars from the match of what they collect. So it boosts it.
That's what yeah.
Right. Right. Go ahead.
They get matched all the dollars that they bring in.
Right, two.
By two.
2 to 1. Yeah.
Okay. Does that money go to the agency that's doing the work?
I'm not sure.
Okay, that's what I'm
Because-
Or does it go back into expanding the program?
Yeah.
Well, see, but that's the question. That's the commissioner's
Yeah, no,
question.
good point. And
That's right.
I don't recall.
If I can add a little bit, maybe the chair may be asking this kind of question: does the federal law stipulate where it should go?
No.
Okay, so that means in a district, then it could go anywhere.
And the federal law, if I'm
Go ahead.
not wrong,
Go ahead.
the federal law allows some forgiveness. Right?
It does. When they started, they came up with these about 15 years ago. They came up with these arrears program or arrears management.
Right.
They don't like that. But what happens if they participate in these programs, fatherhood programs, and they complete these programs? What they do is that more often than not, they'll forgive
Have a portion of it.
with the state. The state will forgive their portion.
Yes.
All right, but the feds, they have to get the feds to agree to, forgiving that portion. But for some of these guys, getting rid of some of that debt is better than getting rid of none of that debt.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's it. But so you got child support, you got Head Start, is an opportunity area. Another area is in this whole area what I'm going to call community development grants. A program that we're going to talk about in a moment kind of speaks to that. But what I just want to encourage you to think about also is that as the commission thinks about fatherhood programming in the district, that those programs should have structure, because we still don't have program standards, for the full service fatherhood program. I'm not talking about the Peace of Night program. I'm talking about the programs that provide some short-term or long-term participation in the program, where the father gets parenting education, The father gets, case management services. The father gets employment assistance. The father, those type of things. Those are kind of your full service programs. Like Joe Jones has. He didn't start there, but that's what it evolved to.
No. Concerned black men.
That's right. Concerned black men.
Yeah.
Exactly. There is a need for standards. We don't have national standards, so maybe that starts at the local level in terms of what should the metrics be. And there's data out there that says about how long fathers should participate in this program, how much these programs should cost per person. Workforce development has a lot of experience with that, just understanding the cost of actually serving a person from the time they start in a work program and the time they actually spend in some type of skills training or some technical program. And so somehow we got to get to that same point when it comes to working with fathers, because see, fathers in the workplace are fathers in the workplace. Workforce development tends to look at them as just an employee in the workplace. When we think about a father in the workplace, workforce development agency or Department of Labor has three main goals. One is of course job placement. That's number one. Number two is job retention, and number three is wage growth. But in the context of the job retention and wage growth part, if the father is having problems at home, he has personal problems, or he has problems at home, that's going to affect his retention. He can get a job, but it's going to affect his retention. Sure. And and if you keep hopping on jobs, your wage growth is not going to occur. And so that's why it's so important for workforce development to be at the table in these conversations, because I would think that the population group that you want to be concerned about is a group who's going to need jobs, because they're probably going to be returning citizens. We stick in the district because
that's what I was about to say. You're talking about in most cases,
right,
a fragile
family. Right. And so, but so what I'm saying is that you got to, as these community-based organizations, they got to operate with a set of standards, and then they got to be trained properly. And they got to, and the training has to be initial, and it has to follow the same professional development markers as any teacher in a classroom. Why would we think it would be different? You follow me? In other words,
now, so right now,
yes.
The federally funded programs are essentially defining.
Right, but let me tell you what happened this year for the first time.
Okay.
We're working in about 6 of the communities. I think it's 50-something about fatherhood grants. We're working in about 6 of the communities right now. A big emphasis at this year's Office of Family Assistance Conference past summer was the fact that what they tend to do with groups like mine, we do evaluation research, we also do a lot of training. They get our training, they say, we got it now, we don't need y'all anymore, right?
And now I'm quite certain you remember that Concerned Black Men used your curriculum,
right,
and had you come back periodically.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, but most sites don't do that, because a lot of them, just like a lot of educators, think that professional development is a fluff. You know what I mean? It's like, why you have to come back? First of all, it's how you quality control.
Yeah.
And then they said, well, we don't have the money. Well, the federal government put their foot down. They said, y'all have the money. And what they did is that all the curriculum developers, they had us involved in the conference this year. And all those folks who were using our materials, they had to be in a room, and it allowed me an opportunity to say, yeah, good to see you. I ain't seen you in a while.
But it goes further than that too,
Yes,
because you can't assume. I mean, we know the programs are not static. So you hire, there's some people who are gone,
Exactly.
and then there's some people who are hired. So on a basic level, we had to have you come back because we had new employees after 3 years or so.
See, but what happens though, let me just call a spade. When you have these programs funded, it's new money in that agency, all right? and some of that money, patches up, old leaks, all right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so even though it seems like you got a lot, when you look at what you owe, You know what I mean?
Because you don't
That's
don't
right.
get enough money.
But let me tell you what they found, because they went out and the federal aid the program officers went out to the projects, and uniformly they said is that where the most problematic area is of those programs is when it comes to working directly with those fathers because of the inconsistency.
Yeah.
You know, there's people that have turnover, that people didn't get trained.
That's right.
And then they would ask me, because they got this National Curriculum Advisory Council, and they said, well, why do you think that is? I said, because what they do is they come get the training one time, and they say, that's all I need. And then I remind them of the fact that, when you go into a McDonald's, I don't care where you go to a McDonald's in the country, the hamburgers taste the same, the fries taste the same, right? And it's uniform. It looked the same. You go to a Cracker Barrel, you go to any franchise operation that has multiple sites. There's a consistency, and the reality is that, and this is one of the aspects of the fatherhood field that is still maturing. There's a lot of stuff out there, but all the stuff don't work. You know what I mean? And what also happens is that a lot of folks write their own stuff. Mm-hmm. We would not accept a person going on a college campus saying that I wrote this and now I'm going to teach these college students to go ahead and be professionals. Yeah. It wouldn't. So why should we accept that even with father programs? Because it's something about this work, and I've known it for 30 years. It's almost like a self-righteousness that goes along with it. Yeah. And it's like, I know what these boys need. I know what these
and
men need.
And that's some of us.
That's right.
Us who are engaged in doing the work.
And right.
In the program.
And
we don't, you've got this idea of what you think is going to, how you're going to help fathers.
That's right.
And so all of a sudden, things like standards and, the types of things that, lawyers would do in their profession, that social workers would do in their profession, that doctors would do in profession, all of a sudden, because you think you know what's good for fathers,
that's right.
You're going to do this in a certain way with no evidence.
That's right.
That it works.
And no continuing education, because social workers have to go back and get professional development. Every summer before you start school year, you go through professional development. Our field needs the same thing, especially if it's going to be respected at the level that it should be.
And unfortunately, Dr. Johnson, what I found was that, and I hate to say this, but the nonprofit work sometimes tends to be soft. I lack a better term, soft. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the employees resist. And what concern black men, what I used to tell the employees is that you are devaluing your status in the marketplace if you resist this. Right. So what you're saying is, okay, if you didn't meet certain requirements and certain standards, then I could just bring somebody off the street and do your job. Oh, no, that's not true. Well, that's what you're saying. You saying, there's nothing to what you're doing, right? So you're just going to bring somebody off the street. What would happen oftentimes is we would, the program officer, the program manager, program director of our program, Fatherhood and others we'd agree that they would hire somebody, and then they would immediately put them in working with fathers. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute, how are you going to do that? Well, there's no training. We got a training part. Yeah, but we need this person. I said, okay, I can just go out in the street, just walk out here and find somebody, bring them in. They can take your job, right? Oh, no, you can't do that. You understand what I'm saying? Same thing with children and working with young people, working with boys. You got to value the industry. It's I value your work because you've met certain standards. The other people that come in have to meet those standards.
Right, because the basic dosage question around successful fatherhood programs, the dosage question, time with that father is minimally is the equivalent of a semester in college. Okay, if you're gonna spend that much time, you need to have some clear objectives. All right, and you got to know whether or not those objectives are being met. But let me move on to a couple other things, and then I'll stop. But again, I want you to just be aware that the money is out there, and it's available in any number of ways. But I do think one of the ways in which you want to do it is in partnership, with other agencies, in terms of commission, in terms of other agencies, but also you want to do them with community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, but you also want to make sure they're trained and that they operate with structure. And because, you know, what's that United Negro College famous tagline? A mind is a terrible thing to waste. You know, and if you're going to spend the time, you know, with those folks, you should know what you're doing.
That's right.
All right? So you got that. A couple other things I want to say. I do think that there's an emerging thought process, too, on research and the importance of research in this area, which stems from clearly articulated goals and objectives, clear understanding of who the target population is, because everybody doesn't need the same thing. But being able to determine that through careful case management and intake procedures. We've been hearing for the last couple of years, evidence-based practice. This it's not going anywhere. Because right now, even if I was to just give you a view of what the Trump administration is doing right now, well, in most administrations, and I've been here in Washington since the Reagan administration, for the first 2 years, it looks like the last administration.
Because they haven't,
They haven't changed things yet. I remember when President Obama was there, I was going over to ACF 2 years after that, and the same folks that was there for George Bush was still there.
And to be, not casting any aspersions, but the reality is this administration is moving even slower.
That's right.
In areas such as this, because it's low priority.
It's low priority, but the point is that
which some people might consider a good thing. I'm not necessarily. I'm not speaking on the record here. I'm just saying some people might consider.
But eventually, they'll figure out stuff. But right now it's pretty much status quo from the Obama administration, which to me was a status quo for the first few years of the Bush administration. So it's just status quo. But this notion of evidence-based practice is very important. It means that, programs have to have, for example, if I was thinking about it as a commission, the thought I would put out to you all is that, is to come up with figure out who you want to work with, specifically as a high priority, and then understanding what their need, develop what I call a macro level logic model. In other words, once who is it you want to serve, and then where do you want them to take? Where you want to take them? You want to take them to the point where, if you look at the child outcomes, you say, I want the child to start the school work ready. And if it's the parent, you want the parent at the end to be in a family-sustaining, unsubsidized job. That at the other end, you want two parents working together in a co-parenting way, and you can document a parenting agreement that they completed, and they're following that that cooperative agreement. And that's very important because, see, when a couple divorces with young children, they have to do that. Well, you talk about a lot of never marries, so they never go before Judge Burnett. They never go, and so they got to get that to the program, right? But that may be an end game. And so if you think about what I'm saying, so that's at the end of your logic model. But there are a lot of intervening things that have to happen. People have to be trained. You got to have the resources, and then you got to have short and medium range outcomes. But and because I think that if the commission is going to help folks get resources to work with fathers, the commission has to have its own logic or theoretical framework for what they want to happen with fathers, so that that technical assistance can be provided, so people can follow the same thing. Every program that does fathers should have a logic model. Where you just a illustration of what do you
how you are helping.
Right.
What is your strategy?
Right.
What is your logic of your strategy behind?
Right.
Helping
what's your theoretical framework?
Getting
what I mean?
From here to here.
That's right. And so that needs and most of your federal programs require logic models. Let me tell you what they require now. That changed. They require a logic model. They require a partnership with domestic violence.
Yeah.
All right. They also are now requiring what they call a partnership with trauma-informed care. Right? That could be a game changer for me. Because my background prior to getting into fatherhood work was workforce development. Okay? And that makes me anxious when you say trauma-informed has to be at the table. Because
For children as well as for the family?
for the family, for the
unit?
family, for the family, and that the fathers need to have should need to be assessed on whether or not they've had trauma episodes in their life that's just influencing current behavior patterns. Whatever. Some fathers probably do. I think a lot of fathers don't have that. But my concern is, and it goes back to the whole promotion and the social entrepreneur aspect of what we're doing here, and that is the emphasis should be on who comes out as opposed to who comes in. You follow that? In other
The
words,
father who comes out the program.
exactly.
As opposed to the father who comes
Come
in the
in
program.
because he's gonna come in. He needs a lot. It's a lot of stuff. You know what I mean? And so, what I see happening now is that the fatherhood funding, even though it's not a lot, is steady state, right? And it's more steady state funding for fatherhood than there ever has been in the history of the world. And folks are trying to figure out how they can graft on.
Yeah.
All right. So fatherhood at the community-based level did begin with the health folks. If you start with Charles Ballard, even Joe, there's a health focus there because that's how mom was getting help, and then mom was being brought there by dad, and they start bringing in the dad. What my biggest concern is with the trauma-informed part, and I say this wherever I get a chance, is make sure you do your the right assessment. Right assessment, and that if somebody needs some deep diagnostic help, they should be over here. Because the last thing that we need is for folks to think that we're working with folks who got a lot of mental health challenges, and they can't, because to an employer,
that's a
it's a death knell because they say, "What you want me to hire somebody who's damaged?"
Right.
All right, and really, it's just like whenever you see a domestic violence, see, to me, you say, well, you have to have a connection with domestic violence. See, I also believe that you need to have a connection with batterers education. Domestic violence focus on the women. You need batterers education for the men. You don't hear batterers education a lot. There's not a lot of slots for that, but it needs to be, because if a guy is assessed and determined to be abusive, you want to make sure the guy gets help.
And
Don't
you want to make sure he doesn't pass it on to
Exactly.
to his offspring,
See, the reality,
because children do what they see.
That's right. That's right.
the
Okay.
reality was in that program,
Yeah.
it's politics. The domestic violence piece was added
It was right.
because women groups were
Precisely.
saying, you giving money to these guys
Precisely.
who are out, and a lot of them have battered women, blah, blah. I mean, in some cases that was true.
That's right.
In some cases
it was not. That's
And
right.
So it was more of an appeasement
Right.
piece. And also the fatherhood program, by the way, the other piece of the appeasement was, and it wound up not being a bad thing for CVM, but in fatherhood programs, women can participate now in the federal programs as a father. I mean, well, they participate in the program.
Right.
You have to find a place for women in the program.
You can't discriminate.
You can't discriminate against them.
Right,
And we
right.
had women in our fatherhood program.
Right.
That particularly if you've got, it's the arguments on both sides, but the reality, and in many cases, what the women were saying is, look, you've got this program that is helping folks get jobs. Hey, man, these women need some jobs, and so we did not. We invite women. There were only a few, but women came in and they did well. We helped them get employment. I mean, the real deal was employment, but you make a good point.
Mm-hmm.
My question is the trauma-informed piece. How is that being fulfilled?
Well, it's being fulfilled because what's happening is.
I mean, how is it being fulfilled?
Well, those are mental health workers, right?
Oh, okay.
Those are mental health people who getting laid off. You ask me, you know what I mean?
That's what you're saying. Okay,
That's,
okay.
you know,
All right.
and where do I fit now? All right? And so you got these fatherhood projects going on, and they come in, they see what's going on, and they say, well, some of these guys may have mental health problems. Some of them do, some of them not. Some of them don't, okay? Particularly when you start working with a lot of returning citizens, you know what I mean? This, you know, and so I don't want to
Make light of it.
Well,
Yeah.
I want to make you aware of it.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, having been in this work over 30 years, it concerns me. Yeah. All right, because I just don't want the programs labeled as mental health projects. You know, and because again, listen, I love being an African American man, but it becomes inconvenient sometimes. You know what I mean? And so I don't need any more labels. Right. All right, and we gotta be entrepreneurial about these men because we want them to get jobs and we want employers to know that they're making a good investment. All right, and that's why I say the emphasis should be on what comes out of the program as opposed to necessarily who comes in. All right, and I would also say for me is that the programs that we help set up, we say that we are educating fathers. We're educating them to be the best dads they can be under their circumstances. That's what we're doing.
But there's also another issue with women participate. What women expect of fathers, and the question of educating women as to the role fathers should have.
Well, listen, I'm glad you said that.
Okay.
I got another handout.
That's good.
I want to pass out to you.
No, you make a very important point because you've got a fatherhood program, and you want that fatherhood program to be holistic in helping the family.
Right.
And when we initially, I'm just using our example with concerned black men, some of the mothers were apprehensive initially. In other words, we called the mother and said, we want you to be involved in the program. Right. And the mothers, some were essentially apprehensive because some thought that we really were being a crutch for a man who's not meeting his responsibilities, right. Not doing what he's supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. But once they saw that we were an honest broker, mm-hmm. and in fact, the program was structured in such a way that an important part of the program was the help session when fathers talked among themselves and fathers reinforced what was important. Right. So a father comes in and saying, yeah, man, she won't let me see my child, that's why I'm not doing. The father said, wait a minute, man, you know that's inconsistent with what you just said 5 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. It ain't all her fault. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's your fault. And help keep them honest. When the mothers saw that, mm-hmm. they were more likely to participate in the program and more successful with respect to the children. I mean, it was a more successful program in total.
And more amenable sometimes to having the father involved with the child and engaged.
And it made it easier, right?
And engaged.
Absolutely.
And more receptive to the father advice to the child rather than cut down
That's
put
right.
down
That's
of
right.
the father.
That's
He's
right.
a no good son of a bitch.
That's right. Some of the strongest advocates of our program wind up being the mothers.
That's right. Well, let me say this. I'm going back many years, and going back to 1991, 92, when I was involved in Young Unwed Fathers pilot project, and even then we saw the need to try to position the mothers in the context of the fatherhood programs. So essentially what we set up was a women's auxiliary group mm-hmm. in support of the fatherhood program. Mm-hmm. And Public-Private Ventures, who was funding the program, funded that activity. Oh, okay. All right, for the mothers to come together, not necessarily, mothers who are in romantic relationships with their child's mother, but wanted to make sure that the women were involved, and so they set up a mother's auxiliary. But let me tell you where we are today. I think that one of there are three emerging areas of practice that's born out of our work over the last decades or so. Mm-hmm. One is a greater emphasis on mothers. Yeah. In fact, back in 2006, mm-hmm. I received a grant from the Union Industrial Homes in Trenton, New Jersey, to actually take our fatherhood curriculum that was geared towards fragile dads. Because see, the thing I want you to understand about fragile dads in terms of the data is that dads and the mothers share the same needs profile, exact same one. All right, dropped out of school, we're not married, and the fragility comes in trying to stay together. You know what I mean, with not having a lot of assets. All right, hence, you know, the fragile family, and the father had not established paternity, because paternity becomes the prerequisite to get the child support order.
And also,
okay?
hence why those marriage programs didn't work in the first place,
That's right.
because you're talking, you know, you
Right.
didn't have a foundation upon which.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the arguments that the folks in Trenton made was, look, you know, we graduating these fathers to the program. The fathers are going back into these situations with the moms, and the moms don't know how to take them off, you know, or accept them, you know, coming back into the situation, because you have not educated her like you've educated the father on responsible parent behavior, or what I'm going to call responsible mother behavior. And so we wrote that curriculum. That curriculum is in wide use right now. It's called Young Mothers and Parenting. And we have an initiative going on in Richmond, Virginia. That's what this newsletter is about, where this particular is under the health department. The health department. Let me say something about the Richmond program that you might be interested in. First, going back to the funding part. The health department funds.
State funded.
State funded, the whole thing. Through the health department. Let me tell you how they did it.
Is that city funded? City funded?
It's state.
State funded. Okay.
It's state.
State of Virginia.
The state of Virginia, through the health department. But the focus is on the city of Richmond.
Yeah.
Because of its, you know,
Demographics.
because of the disparities.
Yeah.
And so they funded this. It's called the Richmond Family and Father Initiative, and essentially they have programs, and they as part of their approach to this, they have called it a public health challenge, and the particular way in which they're using resources is for infant mortality reduction.
Wow.
That's what, and so in
And
order
that's coming out of the Department of Health.
it's coming out of the Department of Health. And they're funding, not only are they funding it, that they just received one of those big community development grants to replicate this project in 4 jurisdictions in the state of Virginia. Okay?
Oh.
And let me tell you what's involved in it. It includes both a dedicated focus on fatherhood and a dedicated focus on mothers. If and when the fathers and mothers get together, it will happen at the end. It will happen at the end of their completion of the respective program. But what's happening is that the fathers go through a 16-week program, the mothers go through a 16-week program.
The respective mother.
Right. Well, in other words, they're getting a lot of their clients from case management roles of the Department of Social Services.
Okay.
All right. So they are able to match the case. All right.
All right.
But they don't go through the program together. The fathers go through the father program 16 weeks. The mother go through the mother program 16 weeks. And then after that, then they are involved in discussion around co-parenting.
Oh, okay.
But it's after. It's not during.
Yeah.
Because mothers have a lot of stuff they want to vet, and get out,
Yeah.
and you don't want that to be challenge. You know, when you see the challenge of working with couples, unless you got some good ground rules, is that you run the risk of having somebody air the dirty laundry of the couple, and tick off the other person.
Yeah.
And so that's why you don't want
I
to.
mean, that's the big challenge.
That's right.
The biggest challenge.
That's right. But we've learned you don't do it that way.
Yeah.
You do it that way. Just like, you know, when you have these immersion schools, you know, dedicated to boys and girls, you know, people always ask, well, you know, why are you doing it separate? Well, you do it separate for a time, but you do bring them together at some point because they got to live with each other, just like these programs. Right. But the innovation that I'm pointing out is a dedicated focus on the mother's education as well as a parent. It's not left to chance.
Okay.
You know, it's not left to chance. In other words, historically, even going back to 1935, you know, one of the biggest confusions always is that when the father pays his child support, it's going to the mother. Well, he's going to the mother because she's a parent of resident, but it's for the child. Yeah. All right? It's for the child.
And that was the other reason why I asked the question about it earlier, because in fact, it technically goes to the state.
That's right.
I mean, in this case, it goes to the city.
Right.
In other words, the money has already been paid.
That's right.
And so it's not like
it's reimbursement.
Yeah, it's almost, some people make it sound like, he's not paying it.
Right.
The child, the kid has already received. The parent has already received that money. This is a reimbursement process.
It's for the child.
Yes, and so that's why
Right.
I was asking questions about waivers,
Yes.
Forgiveness,
Right.
etc. Because it's not a deficit to the family.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
That's not. And that's just an education you have to do to the fathers. But if you look at this, if you turn to
Doctor, I want to give the commissioners a chance to ask
Okay.
questions in a second. So in about 5 minutes.
I'm done.
Okay.
I'm done. I'm gonna stop here. But I
And,
want
and
you
the
to,
audience as well.
I want you to see their turn to page 2.
Do you have an extra one of those? You should. Okay, thank you.
And you can see, the illustration here on page 2.
Page 2.
And
No, he doesn't, but
I'll give you this. And you can see the flow, right? And we've been involved with this project from the very beginning, and they're using all of our stuff, right? And you can see how they got this set up. Our requirement is 16 weeks, but you can also see they've added
21.
Because 2 weeks of trauma-informed practice, okay, and 2 weeks of co-parenting, all right? But they don't get the co-parenting until after the mothers and fathers respectively complete the program, all right? Because they're going to be more sensitized and aware to, what they're doing to contribute to
Each one to contribute to the
exactly, all right? Because our practice in the past with the parent or resident is to, for the child's sake, Section 8, SNAP, Medicaid. And since you live with the child, I'm assuming you're responsible. Do it. But what we found is that you got to deal with some of these mothers' attitudes and behavior just as much as the dads.
Yeah,
all right. And the results of this program has been so significant that they just received a 5-year demonstration grant to replicate this project in 5 jurisdictions in the state of Virginia.
Oh.
All right, through this integrated approach.
A Richmond-based entity.
It's because the Richmond City, Virginia is divided by health districts.
Okay.
And so it's the Richmond City Health District.
Okay, I see.
But it's a state agency.
Okay.
And they
But
receive.
that district has received money to replicate it in other districts around the state.
Exactly.
Outside of their district.
Right, exactly. Outside of the city of Richmond.
City Richmond State.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and the emphasis I want to make here is it allows you to work with both mom and dad in ways that lead them to a point of relationship self-sufficiency. All right, but whether or not they marry or not is another thing. But I can tell you, some of them have married or decided or had problems going on in their marriage and have actually improved those relationships as a consequence of the program. But and again, it's too early to tell whether or not it's going to sustain over time. But I do think that the issue with the motherhood work was born out of the fact that you can't get the father to be the dad if mom is not cooperating.
Right, that's all right.
Right. The last thing I would say that I want you to be aware of that's being tested out and funded through child support innovation grants is what they call parenting time agreements. Parenting time agreements. Let me tell you what a parenting time agreement is. A parenting time agreement is an agreement established under the jurisdiction of the court, but what it does, it has the child support order and the custody order packaged. In other words, they're two separate things now. And what they're doing is combining them under parenting time agreements that include both the child support order and the visitation and custody arrangement as part of one order.
In some states, you talk about shared parenting.
Shared parenting, but that's a game changer, all right? Because what we found is that resistance to it from the moms is over the fact that if dads share the custody, what does that do?
Well, dad's got to have some dollars to help.
Now, we've been fighting that problem in Maryland for the last 3 or 4 years.
It reduces the child support award. All right, because if the child is under dad's custody and dad is doing food, shelter, water, then you can't charge that this other amount. All right, but again, that's why you want to take the mothers through the education program, because you want to let her know that the money wasn't for you anyway; it was for the child. And there's some way. Let's process this, because what's more important, to the child. And the point is that what's more important to the child is they have two loving parents involved in their life through the life course. Yeah. So let me stop there.
Yeah, okay.
I know I've said a lot.
And we appreciate it.
Okay.
It's been helpful. What I want to do first is open the questions up to the commissioners.
Okay.
Commissioner Grant.
Dr. Johnson, thank you for the presentation. I do apologize for coming in late. I am Commissioner Silas Grant, and it was a very thorough presentation, and you covered a lot. And what I noticed, a lot of the themes were around, and I think it may have even been said, like traditional fatherhood roles. And what I've noticed in my personal path is that I'm starting to hear this term, toxic masculinity, around fatherhood and father roles, right? And in some instances, the phrase is appropriate, and in some instances, it may not be appropriate. And what I've noticed is that there's been some tension around mothers and fathers who may not be in a committed relationship, but they're working to co-parent. And in some instances, the father wanting to have a role in how the child is raised. And
What is your understanding of what that term means?
Well,
Toxic.
Well, it's not so much about my understanding, it's about the use of the phrase across the board, right? That's more what I'm talking about, because there are people that are misusing it, right? So my question is that...
No, what I'm saying is...
What's the definition of
yeah,
toxic?
what is it, your understanding of the definition?
Right.
Because I'm not really familiar with the term.
Toxic masculinity is a phrase that's being used now as a means of undermining what we've previously known as traditional men and father roles, right? So if a father tends to be more abrasive or more forceful in rearing the child, there's a blanket terminology used to say, well, that's toxic, and we shouldn't do that in any situation, right? I'm trying to struggle to give you a specific example, but in general...
Are you suggesting that the mother's role is being minimized, and she's more or less saying, you're pushing me out of the child's life, and the father's doing too much, or what?
You can choose.
So typically when they talk about toxic masculinity, it's what is portrayed by the rappers. All right, A. But then B, when it comes to co-parenting, it's a father fighting for equality in parenting. It's a father who's outside the home trying to be the same father that he would be if he was in the home, right? So there's an extreme version which is portrayed by the rappers, misogyny, disrespecting women. That's an extreme version. But when it comes down to co-parenting, I think that's what Commissioner Grant is talking about. It's talking about the fight that a father outside the home has to have the same role.
50% equal role.
Right. So if mom has domicile, mom has residency, if mom has total control, then mom wants to be the sole decision maker in that father's fight.
And if that father steps up and attempts to,
then it becomes
then he's
right.
Then some deem him to be toxic,
right, because he's impacting mom and how mom wants to approach the situation.
But then it's also about the design or the way in which the father jumps in. So he may not be as much of a nurturer as the mom naturally is. And when he approaches fatherhood with less nurturing than the mom, in some instances, there's again a blanket statement that that's toxic and that's not the way we should raise children. So I'm not here to judge whether or not
I understand.
That's I'm not here to judge the range in which we determine whether or not it's toxic. But my main question is that, have you come across any resistance from people saying that the way in which the fatherhood programs are rolling out, they are still rolling out in a way that some may consider to be toxic?
No, I have not. And I would say a couple things. First of all, we know that there's probably only two things that mothers can do that fathers can't. You know, and that's bear a child and breastfeed. Everything else is negotiable. You know, you follow me? But again, I think that the point of education, again, you got to make sure that mothers and fathers get the same type of responsible parenting education, you know, which has an attitude focus, but also has a knowledge gain focus, because they may be unequal in their understanding of how to rear kids. You know what I mean? And so it's just a matter of making sure that they both get exposed to information that's going to help them be better parents. And I think that coming from the hip hop community, I would dare say that it's probably a case in point in that person's life, and not necessarily across the board in the context of their perception of what those things are. But the child development research or the child development data gives us our best information yet on the significance of both parents. All right? A lot of fathers don't know that. A lot of mothers don't know that. But I can quote you 100 studies that say that having a loving and nurturing father is as important to a child's self-development and healthy growth and development as having a loving and nurturing mother. Not more than, but just as important. And that's something, Judge Burnett, maybe even some judges don't understand yet. So that speaks to the education that the commission has to do of attorneys and courts.
How do you think that's interpreted within the context of same-sex families?
Well, my experience has been is that the issue does not come. The issue is more the fact that the father is male than the orientation. I can recall working with a Head Start program out in San Jose, California. We were working with Head Start on doing their Fatherhood manual. So we interviewed a number of Head Start directors. And so out in this area is a number of married, same-sex couples. Making a long story short, he would have his parent meetings, and he would, and some of the parents, the male parents, two male parents, would say that they're having problems with the Head Start staff in understanding that they know how to parent too, and they were wondering why, and what they determined, it was not because they were the parents, it's because they were male. You follow me? And so what I'm saying is
staff was used to dealing with
women. All right, that's right. And so they didn't know that men could do these things. But then, when you ask the question, and these are simply stated, when you think about, a famous chef, do you think of a male or a female? I'm just saying, generally speaking. All right. My only point is that men can cook. My father cooked. You know what I mean? I cooked for my kids.
Well, the issue from a judge's perspective is whether or not one of the men can take on the mothering role,
right,
and how that impacts the emotional and maturity of the child.
Right.
And what we have to look at when you have, say, two women or two men, can they play the roles effectively without discord and causing emotional trauma to the child? Right.
And, a lot of that is kind of socialization, whatever. But I would add here, just for your information, that the fastest growing parenting type is the stay-at-home dad.
Yeah.
Is the stay-at-home dad. So that should answer some of those questions too.
Question from?
Yeah, my question. You spent most of your discussion talking about programs that are federally or state or government funded. But in your presentation, you had mentioned about you had listed some foundations, and so I was just curious as to what are some of the programs that you are doing that use foundation money.
Well, here's the thing. The national foundations in particular that influence the regional and local foundations a lot, because some of the regional and local foundations get money from the national foundation. And as far as, from my perspective, from the fatherhood work is concerned, is that how we got started and how we sustained ourselves up until 2005, so to speak, was through private foundation dollars. Annie Casey, the Ford Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, I can name you. And then what happened is that once the federal program got started, the foundation said, we ain't got to do it anymore.
And then that's defeat. Yeah, it really defeated
Right.
The purpose, because you replaced one pot of money with the other. When
That's
in
right.
fact, that program really needs
Right.
that additional money.
That's right. And then you run into the whole issue. I'm just going to call it generally. The private foundations got fatherhood fatigue.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, so you still have some like the Open Society that's still funding programs. But here's what happened. Interesting enough, and this is why. And this is a question that y'all have to answer as a commission as well. Have we progressed enough around our work with fathers to the point now we say we stop saying fathers and we're working with parents? Just putting that out there. And the reason why I say that is because one of the things that happened in the foundation community when the fatigue was coming on, some of those program officers were still working with those foundations, and then they try to rename the stuff. In other words, you have this initiative out there, and some of you've heard of it, called Black Male Achievement. All right, and that was the same money that they used to fund fatherhood. And so the logic is that now that this kid is not achieving, you can base it on the father absence, but now we're going to work directly with that child. But when you do that, it narrows your focus on the father. Same thing happened in the federal government. When they came up with the My Brother's Keepers program, one of the things that I try to do as president of the National Fatherhood Leaders Group was to get fatherhood added to the language, of the My Brother's Keeper program. I even had the White House people working with me. They didn't do it, right? And so, in other words, what has happened with the private foundation community, and it goes through different cycles. But right now, even though I identified them as those have been sources of funding for fatherhood, I don't know how relevant they are right now. But they will fund a male initiative, but they may not fund a father initiative. But when you think about
it's becoming hard to get them funded male.
Right. When you look at if you look at the family as a unit of intervention, then what it says, because the commission, it says it's a commission for fathers, men, and boys. You probably can get the money for the boys, right? And help make sure those boys are responsible dads before they start making choices about their, thinking about you want them to think about the future of being a parent. And so maybe that's a way that you can do that with some of those foundations, because, but what they did, they changed, they actually changed the focus areas. And I think it's because, again, they put, I can't tell you the millions of dollars, that those foundations and William and Flora Hewlett, the Danforth Foundation out of Missouri, they put a lot of money in this. And so, but their goal was to make the case that the federal government needs to be doing it. And the federal government is right now. It's just not enough. Yeah. All right? And so what you end up with is really trying to think about, as I said earlier, how can your existing TANF dollars, how can your dollars through child support waiver, how can your dollars in Head Start, now that fatherhood programs are required, how can some of those dollars be used in a more creative way, an expanded way? Mm-hmm. All right, and I use that term very choice, all right? Because the thing is that the big argument, even when we began doing the fatherhood work, and we said we want to do it for the welfare of the child, was the fact that the advocate community on that side basically said that we don't have enough money to work with the mother and child right now. And now you're saying add the father. Yeah. All right? And so the way we got around that in the early days is said that we're asking for more money. We're just asking for more. Right. We're not trying to take the place of yours. We're asking for more. And I do think the more question is still on the table.
Let me bring quick question. I'm just going back to the CDC study you started
yes.
with earlier. Is that, the comment you made that black fathers are more involved, is that something that you can, like a statement that is relied on in the community?
Oh, yeah, it is.
The
It
art-
is.
I don't know how rigorous the study was,
Yeah.
but it was in the Post.
That's right.
It was
And
publicized.
it was done by the CDC. You know,
For
that's-
CDC and Pew Report.
That's right.
And there's several other organizations.
It's in there.
Because I wonder what you meant by, how do they define formal involvement? Is there an informal involvement?
Well, see, it's not documented. In other words, the father's there, but he's not saying he's at that address.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, and there's a number of reasons for
Right.
that.
Because see, that to me, that's one of those other issues, thorny issues. You know, is how do we define poverty? You know, in some respects. You know what I mean? Because you're talking about, you know, really economically challenged folks, and the fathers don't want to be the obstacle for their child getting into Head Start.
Right.
All right, because that's how you get the child care taken care of. The data says that it costs about $24,000 to $30,000 a year to have your child in some type of to get child care or daycare center. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But Head Start is a federally funded program for low income families with children, and that's so it's
Free lunch.
right. He got that. Same comes to all the other eligibility types of things, and what we got to do, maybe it's something that the commission might want to do, is look at some of those policies and maybe redefine the poverty level so that the fathers, get included. You know what I mean? And close as opposed to having to hide all the time.
We know the policies have racism built into them. I mean, and that is in reality, that's, the population that many of the cities were dealing with were disproportionately African American or brown and black. And that way of thinking in terms of how, in other words, these are the conditions under which we're going to help your family.
Right.
And in many cases, the fathers had to acquiesce if they wanted their kid to get health
that's right.
Head Start.
Right.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Dr. Johnson, how you doing today?
How you doing, sir?
It's been a while. My question would be, is from our point of view, and how we would move forward in aiding this work. Is it just a matter of, in addition to all the things that you listed, could it be just a matter of approach and marketing, right? Because if we laser beam the focus on men and fathers who are at this economic level that are dealing with these chronic and systemic issues, and it's isolated as if it's just them, if we expanded the net to men, right? Because I think every man has a story as it relates to A, being an unwed father, B, being a divorce, E, trying to co-parent between households, or there's a number of scenarios that work across the board, across the income level, across the economic and education level, that is similar to the targeted population of that man who is poor, who may be incarcerated, who cannot find a job. The system in and of itself works seemingly against fathers in general.
Right.
So if you broaden the scope or broaden the approach to include a different type of man, an educated man, or a man that works, or a man that makes more money, and provide those stories and provide those experiences, couldn't that help to get more for the target population?
I don't know that you get more, but I would certainly endorse a program work with all fathers. You know what I mean? And maybe the balance point, I'd say, 60%, is who are really economic emergency room dads. That's kind of your priority. But 40%, the other 40% is the other dads. All right, because I think the needs are different. You know what I mean? For example, the challenge I used to have with the last administration, even with the president, was over how he looked at the fatherhood issue because of his circumstance. In other words, he had his dad in his life, and his dad left. But he saw him, and he knew who he was, right? Which is much different than a person who never saw their dad in the first place.
Or even know who he is.
Don't even know who he is. And so and what that speaks to is this notion of personal responsibility. all right? You need to know whether or not that right. That's right.
That's what you mean.
That's right. See, right. See, when he leaves, so he was accurate in he should accept the personal responsibility. But what about the dad who never saw his dad and really don't understand what personal responsibility means when it comes to that? You follow me? Sure. And so your starting point is different. And a lot of people, because for example, some of these dads, when they're returning citizens, and some of these dads who kind of been underground, when they surface, they got a lot of needs, right? What's not their concern first is visiting their kids. That's not their first concern. It's I need to get this together. I need to get me together because when I see my child, I want to be, presentable.
And part of the education process is getting him to understand that the child may not see him like that. The child sees his daddy. That's
right. Yeah. But you got to work with him to get there, all right? Whereas there are other dads who say, was living with mom, they split, they were married, divorced, that type of thing. And so when that dad comes to your program, he wants to know first, how can I get access to my child? That's what you got to start. And so what I'm saying is that you can do that, but that involves case management. That involves, if you're going to have them in groups together, to be able to set some good ground rules. Because for example, I would never advise a group to start a group of fathers with a group of divorced dads and some young fathers who've never been married. I would mix them. Right? Because why? Because the data says that the younger father is probably still involved in a romantic relationship and still dreaming over the fact of what a relationship could go.
And that divorced father is going to say, "You dreaming?"
Listen. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
You follow me? You follow me? So what I'm saying is that what you could have, a component that works with unmarried or divorced fathers, and then you can have another one that deals with their married father. You can do both, all right? But what my concern would only be, what are the rules you're setting up so that the older fathers who are, for example, in one of the studies, the most scientific study done on fatherhood was done in 1993 to 1997, the Parents Fair Share program. They targeted fathers. The way they got fathers were they became a part of the child support office, and they looked at the cases where the fathers were slow payers, and they essentially targeted that population to see, what they could do for them in terms of getting them to pay child support, which involved employment, those type of things. But the characteristic of those dads is that they were in an estranged relationship with the mom. They had not been around the mom for 5-6 years. They had been avoiding child support, but they were not there with the mom either, okay? And those dads had moved on, and they also had issues in that past relationship. Whereas some of the other demonstration projects, they didn't deal with those dads. They dealt with dads, again, who were the fragile dads, who were just starting out, and even though it was important for them to understand divorce, it was important for them also to realize what the potential was for their relationship. And I'm just letting you, the diverse fathers are very diverse. Even African American fathers, they're diverse in what their needs are, whatever. I went to a symposium held by Calvin Butts at Abyssinia Baptist Church in New York some years ago. A couple things happened. One is that he was when a child was being blessed or christened by the church, when he would invite the family, when the mother would say, "Can the father come?" Calvin Butts would say, "Yeah, he can come, but when I ask y'all to come up, he can't come up." And so Ron Mincy and I asked him why, right?
Yeah.
And he could come. He didn't know why. He just said.
Well, see, that's that whole
that's
thing
right.
of I know.
But let me tell you what he did though. He said after that very simple question challenged him to this point. He started digging into more of these things, and he found out the reason why he wouldn't ask him to come up because the mothers didn't want him to come up.
Yep. Okay.
Right? And he changed that practice because he said it wasn't the dad, it was the mom. Okay, and so.
Let me make certain. I just wanted to see if there's a question from the audience. We're running low on time. Yes, sir. Here. Sorry to cut you off, Doctor.
How you doing, Dr. Johnson? My name is Kevin Reed. I'm MSW student at the University of Maryland.
Okay.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. One, at the beginning of your speech, you said something about 75% of it. I think you said, I wrote American, I don't know if you said African Americans live without the father.
No, I didn't say that. I said 75% of African American children are being born out of wedlock.
Kids, okay, that's what you said, out of wedlock. Now, with that in place, from currently being in low-income environments and also interning at a fatherhood program in Prince George's County called the Adams House, when you spoke a lot about the traditional family with a father and mother. Now, in most environments, what I've seen empirically, that there's multiple out of wedlock relationships with the father,
Right.
with multiple ones.
Right.
That's something that I didn't see you touch on.
The issue of multiple partner fertility.
Yeah, and blended families.
Yeah.
Now, if we spoke a lot about traditional families. So now we know that, according to research,
Very good.
we know that the blended family has took over the traditional
I agree.
family.
I agree.
So now when you factor that in,
Yeah.
and you have all these kids, and also I participated, sat in child support hearings in Upper Marlboro.
Okay.
Seeing this occur.
Okay.
Multiple cases
Right.
of clients I had, I
Right.
say, oh, Mr. Reed, I got another case too.
Right.
And, you know, I forgot to say, I got 3 of them, so I'm gonna sit in here with you.
Right.
I need you to advocate for me on all 3 of
Right.
them. So now there's 3 different mothers.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the teaching of the parents,
Yeah.
where's the program structure inside of that? Or what's really going on reality-wise and purely? Also, attached to research, because research is very important, and I'm a firm believer of evidence-based practice.
Right.
I'm under the study of that.
Okay.
But how can we touch something that addresses something on as far as the blended family and where it's going, and also with the multiple parents, multiple relationships of children born out of wedlock.
Let me get an answer.
Right. A couple things. I don't know if I said traditional. Well, I think what I said is that 2 parents working together, whether or not they're married or not. I would say the marriage is traditional. You follow me? You know what I mean by that definition? When you're dealing with multiple partner fertility cases, and Judge Burnett knows this, everyone is a single case. Everyone's a single case. My goal in working with folks is get them to understand the fact that, because one of the things I've been advocating programs to do is to see the non-married family in these multiple relationships as a blended family. The blended family is a legal term. You know what I mean? It's legal. It's a legal term. See, you talked about in the legal part of it comes out of being step parents. You follow me? Those type of things. And so, when you never marry, you never get the legal designation. You follow me?
So in other words, he does not see himself as doesn't see his family as a blended family.
Nor does the court.
Yes.
Nor does the court. All right, but that's our mission field. You know what I mean? So and so
that gets back again to the whole fragile family
that's
thing.
Right.
A non-married individual.
That's right. And so
a guy having children by 4 different women.
That's right. Exactly. Right. So what we try to do is to say, look, right. First of all, when the guy comes in and if he stays in the program 16 weeks, about week 3 or 4, he's thinking about these things now in ways that he never has before. And so what we're trying to do is to educate folks, educate them. Let's make sure you take care of the one you're with right now. Let's do that, right? But also, we want to reach a high level of maturation where, if it's possible, because it's not always possible, for him to have a relationship with the other, children, because they may be adopted. It may be that could be the subject of some parenting agreement that they establish. But we do encourage, and I encourage practitioners to really look at never married couples who have multiple children as blended families, because that's how they see each other. Their parents know each other. They've been knowing them for years. It's right. Yeah. But the only reason why it throws you off is because it's not been legally determined, because there was not a marriage. And so what we're trying to do is to say, look, we're trying to educate folks, educate them. Let's make sure you take care of the one you're with right now. Let's do that, right? But also, we want to reach a high level of maturation where, if it's possible, because I don't it's not always possible. But what we're trying to do is to reach a high level of maturation where, if it's possible, You see, automatically when a divorcing couple marries again, they call them blended family. All right, but when you never met, you see, you never do that. And see, in never married folk, it's very important. Never married folks, which is largely the case that's happening in the community. But I might add this: what I didn't say: 75% of African American children being born out of wedlock, 55% of Latino children being born out of wedlock, 40% of all American children are being born out of wedlock. All. And that's important.
Right.
Now, and that's why hence the new push towards parenting and not necessarily marriage. All right, because it's kind of meeting couples where they are right now. You know,
Parenting as opposed to fatherhood, you mean?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So wouldn't it be fair to say, and I think we all probably have identified this, so a lot of our systems really haven't caught up with the realities of what we see.
They have not.
And we're right. So, like in your case as a social worker, so a lot of the practice, right, is really going to be determined on how experienced you are as a practitioner to be able to handle that specific client and that client's needs. Because
outside the social work school, last weekend I was in Wichita, Kansas, and it was a fatherhood symposium, and it was being sponsored or hosted by the School of Social Work at Wichita State University. And the whole goal of the symposium was to inform the social work department about these issues.
Yes, yeah.
All right? Because the students, you know, the
That's
current
where we
staff,
start.
they didn't have the backgrounds to articulate what you just said, or had enough understanding of the work that we all do to inform how to do their casework, which in this case, those fathers could be, those family members could be resources to try to address the situation.
Commissioner Malone.
Doc, first of all, glad to have you here. As you know, you're part of my foundation as a certified master trainer.
Yes.
So a lot of what you said, I'm sure I've absorbed already.
Yes.
I want to share a couple of things and ask you a question.
Okay.
There's some new areas.
Okay.
Last night I was on TV with 13 cities talking about domestic violence with the black women for positive change. Every 6 seconds, there is a domestic violence case with the father and the mother. That's an area of men that we haven't yet addressed. What you touched on with trauma-informed treatment, we're getting ready to bring to Prince George's County. Now, young man, I want you to know we got a commission in Prince George's County. You aware of that?
No.
There's a commission getting ready to start in Prince George's County based on our model. And there is training, thanks to you, that we built up from for the 21st century look, that's going to train all the districts in Prince George's County, because the new move is to take a look at how these men of purpose and promise can touch the lives of the young people, but also we're talking about fatherhood support groups that would, and we need that in D.C., fatherhood support groups where you got the old and the young in that group working together to police each other. So there's some magnificent new things coming in the field. And a lot of it's based on you. I don't know if you brought up the Family Bill of Rights. We've built out the Family Constitution. That a father is a family, whether he's with the mother, as long as he's with his child, that's a family. You know what I'm saying? If the mom's with the child, that's a family. But we have to educate. We have to continue to educate on these concepts. Now, one other thing I want to share, you know, we have Dr. Sharon Barnes wrote the book, Toxic Parents. She's on, I just finished talking to her before I came in. She's on one of my boards. But the toxic parents is probably the greatest danger to the fallout of violence within the family structure. So we got to understand parenting too. So my question to you is, don't we need to take a look at upgrading to the 21st century look of that father? You know what I'm saying? Your research is the foundation. There's no question. But there's some new things happening in the area of domestic violence, returning citizens, their families. These are the men and the fathers that we that we need to reach out to touch, I would
Let me
surmise.
let me say this before you got here.
Yeah,
we
we
talked
did
about
talk
that.
about
Okay,
that.
I should have known. I should have known.
And I'm going to go quickly to our last question, the gentleman in the back.
My name again is Jay Luke. I'm from the Office of Attorney General.
Yes, I thought I recognized you, bro.
I think I might be able to touch.
You were here last time.
I think I might be able to touch on some of the issues you were talking about as far as workforce development. With the DC Child Support Office, we actually created a program which is called the Alternative Solutions Program, where we identified issues where we had fathers that would receive child support orders with no ability to pay. So what we did is we actually created an entity within our agency where we have caseworkers, which I have Ms. Lucas here, who's actually one of our workforce development people.
Okay.
Where we actually help them get job training and provide them with wraparound services. Because we noticed that it's not only having a job is an issue, but maybe finding housing or assessing mental health issues and things like that. And then also as far as the funding with the federal dollars, our agency is funded 66% through federal dollars. The way it works is in the District of Columbia, if you receive TANF, if whatever parent that is receiving TANF, they automatically go for the opposite parent for child support to recoup some of that money. Now, DC is actually pretty generous when it comes to the money that they actually give to that TANF recipient, because in some states, if you receive TANF, they're going to make that other parent pay child support, and that person that's receiving TANF doesn't get anything. They just get that TANF money. But in the District of Columbia, we'll give you up to $150 of your TANF, of the child support money. So for instance, what that means is if your child support order is $300, right, and you're paying $300 a month, and the mother is receiving a TANF grant, you'll get $150 of that $300. The rest goes to the government to help recoup that money for the TANF grant.
The mother will receive that.
The mother will receive
above what she receives from TANF.
So she'll get a TANF check and $150 child support check.
Okay.
And the child support agency, we're actually required to meet a certain amount to establish a certain amount of paternities, as well as establish a certain amount of child support orders to help recoup that money, because we have to pay that money back. And if we don't meet our numbers, we'll either be fined or our budget will be cut.
City
Fuzzy area.
City rules. Is that a city? Is that the council?
It's federal FFFP.
Oh, okay.
So we actually report to the federal council.
Okay.
And actually, that we get that money from the say Congress or
Okay.
but it's really to help offset that TANF.
I see. Last question. I'm sorry, but one of the commissioners wants. Commissioner.
I just wanted to put this out there for the record. When we talk about unwed fathers and the issues that come from that, regardless of economic level, is it something that could be done at the federal level to just look at the point of birth, right? If you're not married, and if you look at the birth certificate, it asks for mom's address, not dad's address. And before dad can sign the birth certificate, dad has to do a parent's affidavit of parentage to accept legal responsibility. That doesn't give him authority over the child. It doesn't even say that he's the dad. It says he's willfully accepting responsibility. Is there a way to fix that problem? Because at the moment of birth, whether dad is involved or not, if paternity is not established, if he's not married and he doesn't do the affidavit of parentage, there's a gap starting from day one, whether dad is in the house or not, that it automatically is assumed that the baby belongs to the mom and mom runs, right? Not negative. I'm not saying negative. He runs, but then dad is out, right? Dad is not married. From day one, dad is out. So is there a way to
I think
get that out there?
Yeah, I think that, again, these are issues that can be brought by the commission with the federal government when they start having hearings. For example, they probably will have hearings on welfare reform. They will also be talking about fatherhood programs. And so House Ways and Means Committee, I'm sure this would be something that they'd be interested in, because even if you didn't testify, maybe you can submit some written statements on that. The other part of it is that may be something that you might want to do here in the district, addressing that concern as it relates to that. But these are things that have been in place for a while, but you got to have an advocacy community who's addressing those type of things. And so, but I can tell you that Congress wants to hear those type of stories. You know what I mean? They really, can get a better understanding of what they're trying to allocate resources for. And I would dare say that it's probably the same for the city council here and the mayor's office. But those are the type of things at a policy level that have to be dealt with. But they have to be, case has to be made. You got to convince people that that's, a significant enough problem, and to change it.
Dr. Johnson, Dr. Johnson, I want to thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We're 15 minutes over. Very much thank you for your lively discussion. I think this is the first commission meeting where we've actually gone over time. But and I know there are other questions that people have had. Maybe you could speak with him afterwards. Very much appreciated. And we will definitely touch base with respect to some of the issues around funding that we're actually looking at as a commission. So thank you very much. Are there any other issues that we need to deal with before we adjourn?
Yes. So, Mr. Chair, just as a point of note.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
why don't you?
Well, I'm going to leave the pleasure.
All right. Okay.
But just as a matter of note, Dr. Johnson, needless to say, his career and work in this field is second to none. He certainly has touched a number of people in their development as professionals. Frank certainly mentioned it. He certainly has touched mine a number of years. I've called on him since the inception of this commission as a technical advisor, and he has just been open arms with us. And so, I could say so much more, but I also just want to add that he also made a great reference inside the government to Dr. Ebola, who's right behind him. So, and the Department of Human Services have supported this commission tremendously. And of course, Dr. Johnson, I think just the connection between these two gentlemen and what they have done. So Dr. Ebola was recognized. Yep.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
He was recognized. Dr. Johnson asking that we recognize him when he certainly has done so with the recognition of a plaque. Go right here.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have a plaque here. We like to. Before we adjourn.
Y'all gonna get a picture?
Yeah, we will.
Thank you. Fantastic, fantastic. On behalf of the Mayor of the District of Columbia, Mayor Muriel Bowser, the original Fathers and Boys, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, for his service as an advisor to the CFMB. He gives the service as a trainer, researcher, publisher, a long-standing sponsor and host of NCPL, International Fatherhood Conferences, establishes him as an essential stakeholder in the work and mission of the Commission of Fathers and Boys. I just want to thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we do.